That's great. All right. So without without much delay, I'm going to start sharing my screen and let's get started. All right. Okay. So today's topic, as you guys know, it's for building products for the Asian customer. I'll give you a bit of introduction about me. In case you're not able to hear me well at any point of time, please add it on the chat box, and I'll adjust accordingly. So just a bit of introduction about me. I'm a product manager with Grab. I've been here 3.5 years, based out of Singapore, and in the 3.5 years, I've worked in Grab's transport team, the food team, and now I lead the super app team at Grab, which is looking to expand the company outside of the core verticals like transport and food. So in today's session, I would like to go through it in just 3 parts and then with open Q&A. I'll give you a bit of overview of Southeast Asian tech economy. Some of you are from Southeast Asia, as I can see, some of you are not. A brief introduction to Grab for those who may not be familiar. And I'll talk about 2 product stories. These are case studies or stories of product development and the challenges faced in my 3.5 years here, which not just talk about the problems, but also highlight the nuances of this particular market and the customers that you have here, and why these problems were specific to these markets and what we did to solve them. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you would all have a fair understanding of what it is to be a developer of products, whether you're a designer, you're a product manager, you're a businessman, a developer of products for this particular region of the world. And in general, I hope it will guide you towards an approach toward, to understanding customers who may not be like you. And even if it's not in Southeast Asia and somewhere else in the world. So let's get started. I would like this to be interactive. So if at any point of time, as Carol mentioned, if you have questions or anything, put it in the chat box. I'm going to stop in between to take questions. I'm going to stop in between to, if you have any comments, happy to have you raise your hand and speak up. Let's interact a bit. All right. So just to give everybody a bit of overview of Southeast Asia in general, for the purpose of this talk, Southeast Asia as a region actually is composed of more countries than I've displayed here. But for the purpose of this particular talk, we're going to focus on these 6 countries when we talk about the Southeast Asian market. There are others, other beautiful countries like Cambodia, Laos, which we have not covered. It's a region of the world with around 600 million population and has 360 million internet users. As of now, this economy is a $100 billion internet economy and is expected to grow 3x in the next 5 years, which makes it a faster growing economy than both China and India in terms of internet. On the right-hand side, what you see are some of the big tech brands in the region. You might be familiar with some of them. Traveloka, which is one of the biggest travel startups. It's Gojek and Grab, in ride-hailing, food delivery. Garena, if some of you are into investing, you would have seen their stock skyrocket. They're one of the biggest gaming companies here. Lazada, which is e-commerce, and so on. So it's very important when we talk about Southeast Asia to know this particular market. which is Indonesia. It's the biggest consumer market in the region. Indonesia is the fourth most populated country. Its GDP per capita is somewhere between that of India and China. So it's twice that of India, which is another, among the developing countries, and about 40% that of China. It has majority Muslim population. The man you see on the screen is actually the president of Indonesia. A bit about Jakarta, which is the national capital, because I'm going to reference it further. It's the biggest city in the region, and it has got really bad traffic. What you see on the photo, this is not an exaggeration. It's a photo anybody who goes to Jakarta can take. And it's also important to note this particular market, which is slightly different. Singapore is actually the richest consumer market in the region. And, maybe this will help you appreciate the diversity of the region a bit. It's the second smallest country, not as big as Indonesia, and its GDP per capita is greater than that of the United States and 7 times more than China. So it's about 80% Chinese, slightly different in demographic than Indonesia, as we spoke about, and it's got high cost of living. If you want to know how high is the cost of living, I would like you to look at the image on the left. That's just what you pay for passing through a toll gate, right? That's a couple of dollars every time you do that. That's fairly expensive from global standards. So let's keep these two in mind whenever we talk about customers or we talk about these markets. A bit about Grab, for those of you who may not know. Grab is the biggest ride-hailing service in Southeast Asia. It is now also the biggest food delivery service in the region. It has a growing payments arm, a lot of investment into fintech, like lending and money transfers, being a wallet, and so on. And it's also got a bunch of more things. So if you see the screen on the right, there's, you can see hotels, you can see movie tickets, you can see insurance. So there's a lot going on. And it's typical of this particular market, something that we borrowed from China for us to embrace apps that are all in one. If you're from a market like, if you're used to a market like North America or Europe or India, most apps are unifunctional, or single purpose apps. And that's very different in this particular region. Let's now proceed to, talking about 2 product stories. But before that I mentioned about, but before doing that, I just want to see if there are any questions in the chat so far. Okay, no questions so far. Then we will proceed. If there are any so far, just type it in the Q&A. Okay. So with that done, I hope there's some context established. So now let's actually go into a couple of product stories that, in my perspective, require hyperlocal solutions and will probably help you get a deeper understanding of the market. The first one is called GrabNow. This is a story very specific to Indonesia, the biggest market of Grab, and it's related to a very special mode of transport in the region, which is motorcycle taxis. Yeah, so just a bit of introduction to that for those of you who may not be familiar. Can I just get a bit of response on the chat? How many of you have been to Indonesia? Just put it in the chat. How many of you have been to Indonesia? Yes, Bali counts, Maria. Bali also counts. Yep. Okay. There's a fair bit of +1. Only to Bali. Okay. All right. So a bunch of people have been. For those of you who have not been to Indonesia, This right here is the most popular mode of transportation for the masses. In fact, it's more popular than a regular taxi or a regular tuk-tuk or anything. Uh, it's and in my view, probably yes, the highest density, the highest number of bike taxi rides in the world happen in Indonesia. And the reason for that is, the way the cities are constructed, it's a very useful tool for last mile commutes. A lot of people come in from trains and buses from outside the city, and there are these stations inside towns from which they then take a last mile commute to their office. And as you saw the traffic in the previous slide, it sort of helps you save time. Now, the interesting part of this particular mode of commute is it is mostly unlicensed and traditionally organized. And with a country that's not yet developed and still has a fair amount of unemployment issues, it means that almost anybody can become a bike taxi driver, which means that the market normally has an abundance of drivers. And I want you to understand that in the context that I'm talking about is 2017, because the first story relates to 2017. Some of this has changed as of now, like because the demand has grown so much, so it's not that oversupplied. But that was the case at that time. It is dominated by two online players, Grab and Gojek, right, with a smaller share which is still being retained by traditional offline OJECs who solicit rides. So I see some of you from India, you can maybe treat this as the auto rickshaw equivalent of India. Now, let's actually look at what happens at a train station in Jakarta. So what you see, the image that you see on your left, this is people who have just alighted from their trains and are waiting for a Grab bike driver to arrive. So what they did was they booked a bike taxi as they would do, just like an Uber. You have an app and you book it, and the driver is going to come in there. What you see right in front of them is there are a bunch of drivers. So if you see all these folks in their green jackets, a bunch of drivers were waiting for passengers to arrive, right? And you can probably see there's something wrong here. Like, why are there so many people who are waiting and so many drivers who are waiting, but none of them are actually getting their driver or a passenger? So why are they waiting? Like, it looks like a recipe for cancellations. Like, the reason for that is the alternative is even worse. All these passengers have an option to go to the person on the right. And these are like readily available at all stations. The problem is these are unsafe and they overcharge. So if you're not, if you're from Singapore, or if you're from any other market where transportation is more organized, or it'll be a bit difficult to appreciate that, just because you went to somebody who offers transportation, they're not going to take you, or they're not going to take you for the fare that's reasonable, right? So it was almost a harassment of sort for people before the online players came in, and hence they're willing to spend more time waiting at the station than go to the alternative that they see, because it's just too painful. But then what you see on the left is also not great, and that did lead to cancellations. And what we observed on Grab is, look, a lot of cancellations are happening because people cannot meet each other. They are waiting for somebody, the others are waiting for someone else, but they just cannot meet each other. It's actually similar to this. So imagine you have a couple of people, both single, sitting back to back and swiping on Tinder, and still waiting for someone to match with them, waiting for someone to text them. When, maybe they could just turn around and match with each other. So this got us thinking, why not just do the same thing? Like, why can't that passenger approach the driver and make a booking with them? And that's when we came up with a service called GrabNow, where what Grab did was we went ahead and we digitized hailing a driver on the street. So we said, look, you don't need to book a driver and wait for them to come to you. Just approach any one of them and book on our platform. It gave customers the same price transparency that they seek from Grab, the same security of Grab's platform, and was perfect for markets where you have a lot of drivers. So, when Uber started in the US, a lot of time it was because, you couldn't find a cab. So it's better to just book a cab and let it come to you. But that is not the case in the situation we just saw. There is a driver. And then you have less waiting time. You can just get off the train, you can get to the driver, and there are no cancellations because you match with each other. So this was, perhaps first of the examples that I'm about to give you of how we were able to take a problem that was very specific to that market and build a solution around it. Let me show you a bit of how that works. Essentially a driver would generate a code. When you go to the driver, this passenger enters it, and here's what happens. I'll maybe play this once more for those of you who may not have noticed what happened here. So there's a driver. So you can see this woman is still on the call with her driver. She's waiting for him to come. While there's another smart woman who just caught up with the driver and matched with him. She didn't have to wait, and he did not have to wait for a passenger. So, so just to summarize that, in the bike taxi market, access to driver was not a problem, but it's safety and price transparency. And that's what GrabNow provided to the market. When we launched in 2017, it was among the fastest growing services in Grab. It reduced cancellations and waiting time and led to a lot of new customer acquisitions because, there are people who might be waiting for the competitor. But if you have a driver right next to you who say, hey, I'll take you at a fixed fare, which you can see on your app, it helps. So let's, yeah. And then what did we do with that? We didn't stop there. We actually launched it at airports and venues. So a similar technology helped us launch in the Jakarta airport and become legal. And we launched something called GrabNow lanes. And even attempted that at an event in Universal Studios. So essentially you turned your fleet of cars into a taxi stand, just as a taxi stand would work. And that actually led way for some of the competition globally. Uber launched its Uber zones in Indian and US airports in 2018, right after this was launched. The GrabNow lanes were launched. And from the feedback I've seen, people really appreciate Uber zones. So it's, and maybe it's an example of, a particular market, which is not the most advanced in the world, actually being able to lead way in certain innovations. So I would conclude story one here and open the floor for certain questions. Just some of the key takeaways are here, like many developing markets, we need to understand that app-based transportation not just solves for access, but it solves for price and safety, right? And in this particular situation, we were able to go deep into the customer's life in a particular situation, like a dense hotspot, like a train station, and actually provide a solution which is counterintuitive in many ways, but is better for them. And something similar may exist in your market for different use cases. So I would really encourage you to try and think about those. I'll pause here and maybe take some questions. I can.
Hi, yes, we do have some questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Hey, Carol, I'm not able to open the Q&A. Let me just check what's wrong here. Okay, I'm able to open the Q&A, but my screen is not shared now. Okay. Nope. Okay, I'll have to unshare my screen because there's a reason I cannot read the Q&A. There are 4 questions here. Later, can you give a brief highlight of Grab? Victor, for the Cambodia market, I'll probably keep it to later. I have to tell you that I have in particular not worked with the Cambodia market, so you might not get a very good answer from me. Okay, that was Victor had asked a question. Can you give brief highlight of Grab's knowledge Cambodia market? Next question, what percentage of bike bookings is through Grab now? Kaushal, I cannot give you that number, unfortunately, but I can say that a decent portion of bookings around such strategically important areas started to come from Grab now. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the answer. Kevin. Okay, there are a lot of questions. How could you stop people from paying the Grab drivers cash directly without making a booking? Carol, when I'm reading out someone's question, you can actually unmute them so that if they have a follow-up, I would like to answer.
Yes,
how do you
of course.
stop people from paying the Grab drivers directly without making a booking through Grab app? Which was, hey, so this is a good question, and a question that's often asked. I'm just looking at all the other questions to see how much time I need to take for this. Again, ensuring, educating. Okay, so this is the last question that, the second last question that I'll take, which is relevant to this, and the others, Carol, we should move towards the end.
Okay.
Let me get back to, this is actually a very relevant question. Why would people not just go and pay the driver, right, and strike a side deal? Well, if you look at it, even if you did not launch Grab now, they could always do that. Like there's still a driver. You don't have the feature in your app, but there is still a driver. You could always do that. And we found that people were not doing that. And the reason for that was simple. The reason for that actually hinged on the fact that there is a merit in those rides being tracked because it helps people feel safer. That's on the customer side. There is a merit in being able to pay through their app because they earn points through Grab's payment ecosystem. And for drivers, there's a merit in having those bookings on record because, and this was 2017, things are different, because they have to hit their right targets to get the right incentives. So in general, both of the parties, due to their motivations and their incentive systems, weren't really that incentivized to strike a side deal with each other, with the commissions being fairly small. But I wouldn't say that side deals did not happen. I'm sure some of them did happen, and they happen even without Grab now. There was another question. Let me get the last one that I'd said. Eunice, you have a question about how much of problem identification and solving I was involved in. I'll answer this more towards the end. Okay. What is the technology and what is the research? How did Grab market disconnected? Okay. There are 2 questions related to technology, which are, I think, good and might help us discuss the market better. This is the last question we'll take on this. So there's a very good question, which is, hey, was there some technological problem in doing this? Because, these markets can have poor data connectivity and they can have issues. So the answer is a yes, at times. And that is where we actually had to make an iteration. The first product that we launched was a Bluetooth product. And let me tell you, that failed. We actually went and it was over-engineered. We launched a Bluetooth product and that just did not work. And we had to make tweaks so that we optimize for the time of connectivity while still giving the users a feeling of being connected. And we were actually able to bring down the failure rates down a lot. But yes, there is a slight chance that you cannot pair. But for such users with whom you cannot pair, they also cannot book a cab because their internet has a problem. So it wasn't any different from not being able to book a cab. Okay, I will proceed so that we have a larger time for Q&As later. Let's go to product story 2. Now this is about GrabFood and about driving growth across diverse markets. So just a bit of context. Uh, I uh, I used to lead. I'm no longer with the GrabFood team. I used to lead the search and discovery function of GrabFood. So in any kind of e-commerce, search and discovery is typically focused on, getting people to buy the moment they come on the app, right? They come and they see what your offerings are. They see, are these restaurants, what's the food you have. They're able to search properly for what they want. They're able to discover the price and promotions and so on. So it's a very critical role in any e-commerce. And so I joined there. When I joined there, GrabFood was at a very preliminary stage of that. Let me give you a bit of context of food delivery market in Southeast Asia first, and then I'll tell you how Grab was placed and the challenges we faced. So in general, and this might be of interest to some of you, the food delivery market in Southeast Asia is actually pretty big when you compare it to the population of Southeast Asia. For example, a market like India, a fast-growing market like India with a 1.3 billion population, which is twice of Southeast Asia, has a much smaller food delivery market than this region. In fact, if my estimate is correct, it's probably half or something. And it's growing tremendously. So these estimates were taken in 2019, 18. I believe that the estimates for 2025 will have to increase because of the impact of COVID-19, which has actually amplified the scale of food delivery a lot more in the market. It is dominated by Grab and Gojek in Indonesia today. That was not the case when Grab started food delivery in 2018. And there are other players like Foodpanda, right? So I want to, maybe get I wanted this one to be a bit hidden, but anyway, I would like all of you to maybe put in the chat, what in your market do customers value the most among these 4? Price, restaurant selection, delivery time, app experience. Can you tell me in your market, what do people value the most? Okay, we've got price, delivery time, promotion, food selection, price. Yeah. Interesting. So the trend that I see is price, selection, delivery time, right? Now, that's actually interesting. I think that tells us a bit about the geographical spread of the people here. So that's true. I think a lot of people in this call are, so look, price in e-commerce is always number one, right? And that's something that's been a big factor in all these markets. What we found out was that for our markets, for some markets of ours, like Indonesia and Vietnam, selection was way more important than any other factor. Of course, like price being same, selection was way more important than any other factor. Like people were willing to forgive a delivery time of over 1 hour but they're not willing to forgive a poor selection, right? Though in a market like Singapore, it's a little bit more delivery time constraint, and you can understand why. In a city like Singapore, where there's not much traffic and the city is very small, it almost never takes you more than 40 minutes to get anywhere. It probably takes you, 1 hour at max if you're stuck in really bad traffic from one end of the city to another. And in a place like Indonesia, people are used to that. It takes you 2.5 hours to go from the airport to center of the city. Most people travel more than an hour to reach their office. So time is a bit more fluid. And you will notice this, that in most countries with very high traffic, people arrive late to meetings. So that is why for us as Grab, it is very important for somebody who entered this attractive market very late to get these things right. So you can get price right by discounting, but you need to get restaurant selection right. You need to get also an app experience right, because there are incumbents who already lead. So how did we do that, right? So if I were to summarize the challenge is this. You're here in June 2018 somewhere. You have an app which is pretty basic. It's low converting. You have a very small market share. You have a poor restaurant selection. You lose money. You need to reach a point where you're a high converting app. You have great restaurant selection. You probably become a market leader. That was a goal given to our team. In fact, some of my colleagues are on the call. And they will remember the kind of pressure we had in that time, and also take a step towards profitability. So how do you go about doing that? I'm not going to talk about the steps that Grab took and how we increased our market share. No, I want to tell you about some specific challenges that we had to solve on two aspects: customer experience and selection, which are unique to this market. And hopefully that'll help you take away some nuances of the kind of customers you see here, so that if you work in a company that caters to this particular market, Southeast Asia, or any other developing market, or if you're an entrepreneur who's looking to launch here, there are some things that you can keep in mind. And hopefully, for me, that would be a good outcome of this. So this is going to be interesting for some of you who may have not worked in a multilingual environment. Just look at the languages that you see on the left, right? There's English, tasty dinner, the same thing in Thai, the same thing in Vietnamese, the same thing in Indonesian and in Chinese. You will notice a lot of differences. One difference that you should notice, and if some of you are used to, those of you who have been to Indonesia or you're used to it, or Vietnam, you'll see that in general, the words are longer. Either the words are longer or there are many small phrases to communicate the same thing. Which means when you put this text on your app, you cannot just design in English. You can't just say, oh, tasty dinner fits right on a button. No, because this particular text in Vietnamese doesn't fit right on it. And there are very few markets in the world where companies, consumer tech companies, have to solve this problem from day one. If you're building an app in China, you have to solve for Chinese. If you're building an app in North America or India, you have to solve in English. Even in a country like India, though English is not the main language, people who use smartphone typically use English. In a country, if you're launching in Brazil, you can start with Portuguese. That's not the case with Southeast Asia, because our users actually use the app in their native language most of the time. And that creates unique challenges. And I'll give you an example of how language impacts app design. Have a look at this. This is Meituan. Meituan is the third biggest technology company in China now. It's a super app that does food delivery, that does transportation, travel. Just look at the amount of information they are able to fit in one page. And one of those reasons is because it's just easier to display things in Chinese. Compare that to an app like Amazon in their US markets or Indian market. It's the amount of information is slightly lesser, but you can see that the text still fits in one line. And then I want you to notice the third app here, which is Traveloka. And you will see that though they have tried to cram in information, it looks very cluttered because everything takes 2 lines. Because the words are just longer, so this is, you see, there is a subtitle which takes 2 lines. So it's difficult for someone to design for that if they are used to designing for a Western market. And which is where a lot of apps that are actually designed for the Western markets may not work very well in offering a good customer experience in this region. And similarly, apps that are copied from Chinese apps may not work very well as well. So just wanted you to appreciate the difference here. How does that impact your design and prioritization? Now, one example is, you're searching for food, right? So if I was building a search engine for an app in the US or China or India, I would solve search for the primary language, and then I would proceed with advanced features like an intelligent search, identifying people intent, ranking the search results very well, improving the UI. But you don't have that luxury when you're building e-commerce in Southeast Asia. And I think a lot of you are from e-commerce companies. I was looking at the profile. You have to first solve for every market's language before you add advanced features, because it's just going to fail. A search engine that works in English will not work for Vietnamese, will not work for Indonesian. You will have to make tweaks. And this is a product manager or a designer heavy forum. So, but go and ask any developer friend of yours who's into machine learning or, NLP and stuff. That task is not easy, but it means that you have to do the difficult part first. Second, your app layout. Your app needs to look great in every language. And I think we covered that in the previous slide on why that's important, which means a user, for whether it's a company like Grab or it's a company like Gojek, or it's not a Gojek because they were primarily Indonesia, company like Shopee, which is the biggest e-commerce app in the region, or Lazada, which is another popular e-commerce app. They have to test their app in every single language and they might have to make hard choices. Maybe they have to prioritize one market, or it looks great in Indonesian, so let's do that. And that's a typical problem that you would face if you are designing or launching products in this market. I was working with a partner just now, they're from India, and trust me, they had a very difficult time launching in Indonesia. So that's something to appreciate. Another thing I would like you to appreciate is just how do you design for different cultures? So we spoke about, there's a reason we spoke about, the diversity of population earlier. Let's take an example. This is a screenshot of the app in Singapore. Now, a filter like halal food is probably the most important filter for this market. Why? Because Singapore has 15% Malay population, which is predominantly Muslim. And this filter is more important than, it's not maybe so important in Philippines. So you cannot have a standardized set of icons that run. A company like Uber Eats can do that in the United States. A company like Swiggy can do that in India. A company like Grab cannot do that in Southeast Asia. There are different, life experiences which make certain users trust different things. Markets like Indonesia and Vietnam, which have a lot of traffic, they want you to tell how far is the restaurant, because they have gotten used to not trusting the time shown by Google Maps. Whereas a market like Singapore, where this problem doesn't exist, they want you to show time because distance isn't really tangible. You will find in your particular market, wherever you're from, there are apps that some apps would show one of them, some apps would show second. Basically this shows how far is the restaurant or how, how much time it takes to deliver. So that's another cultural aspect that you have to respect in order to get the maximum bang for your buck. And another interesting aspect is, how people perceive content. For example, you see a recommendation of a food here. It says Captain Ruby's breakfast. Now the reason this probably works here is because Indonesia is probably after Brazil, is the heaviest user of Instagram in the world. I think it's about 4x heavier than other comparable developing countries. And so a lot of people here, a lot of restaurants have their own Instagram pages. There are a lot of food influencers. So it makes sense for us to incorporate such cultural elements into the app, which means what all of this means is that your app needs to be highly configurable based on markets if you have to achieve success in all of them. And that's important because none of these markets by themselves are very big. Together they make 600 million, but individually they're like 20 million, 50 million, 30 million, all these countries. So that's something that's extremely important. Yeah, the last part that I want to cover on this before we have a more heavy Q&A section around this. In fact, even before that, I would like to look at if there are any questions so far, because this was maybe a bit heavy of a topic. Okay, there are no questions on food so far. Most questions are on RABNOW. Okay, we will then proceed. So what I told you that, hey, so what matters the most to some of our markets, like in Southeast Asia, is selection, right? And you will see that reflected in in the way a lot of companies operate. When you see e-commerce, the standardization of catalog takes precedence in countries like, in regions like North America and Europe. Whereas in this market, it's having as many sellers as possible, which is a higher priority, or as many products as possible. It's just how the market works. So what problems does that lead to for somebody who enters late in the market? So what I want you to see on your screen right now is the order flow that happens in a typical market like Singapore in a food delivery. I'm assuming most of you have ordered food at some point of time in your life, right? So you go to an app, you find a restaurant, you place an order, and then somebody comes and delivers it to you. That's an assumption. So a typical process that happens in a market like Singapore, and you will see the same with Uber Eats in the US, most countries in Europe, in fact, even in markets like India with this apps like Swiggy, is a customer places an order, a merchant receives an order, starts food preparation, a driver picks up the order and delivers. Right? It's how you have always ordered Pizza Hut or something, right? And it's how you've always ordered food. And that works. But there's a slight problem in this when you are a late entrant in the market. Because setting up this system takes time. You have to go and integrate with the restaurant's technology. You have to use technology to integrate with the restaurant when you onboard them. You have to create those payment transfer processes. And when you are late and you have incumbents who are already on a roll and have great selection, that's a problem. You just cannot afford to do that, right? So in a market that values selection over everything else. So how could Grab quickly provide a good selection to users while maintaining good experience? So this is something I'm telling you, like, which happens, more in a market like Indonesia and Vietnam. So Grab had to follow a strategy that went something like this. On day one, Grab had to actually, and this is not just Grab, it's players in these markets. You have to actually treat your merchants slightly differently. So it's not just, you cannot integrate every merchant. Rather, you have something called a concierge merchant, and you have an integrated merchant. What does a concierge merchant mean? A concierge merchant is one with whose systems you are not actually integrated. You do not, they do not receive an order when a customer places an order. Rather, a customer places an order, a driver receives that order, a driver goes to the restaurant, places the order in the restaurant, stands in a queue, places the order in the restaurant, picks it up, pays cash to the restaurant, and delivers it to you. And then there's an integrated merchant who follows the same strategy as above. Now, what you will notice is that you might have heard this word somewhere, concierge, right? And maybe there are companies in your markets in respective cities where you live that are already doing this, right? They're going and picking up grocery for you. They're going and doing a bunch of errands for you. But in most such markets, concierge comes right in the end. So you will see, and look back at the companies in your markets, you will see Uber Eats started with what you see on the top here, the order flow that you see on the top. Deliveroo in a market like the UK started exactly like this. Swiggy in a market like India started exactly like this. But in a market like Southeast Asia, companies have to go different, and the norm is actually to go concierge. Because of the requirements that people have, which means that the customer base here is willing to forego, is the convenience of a lower delivery time, is willing to accept cancellations that happen due to a process like this for selection. So if you ever plan to start a company here, just take note of that. It's going to be useful. Okay. So I don't want to make this a lecture. We've spent 45 minutes. I want to conclude and open space for, a lot more questions to come in. And I'm happy to see there are about 15 more people who joined us midway. Welcome, everybody. So just some key takeaways from GrabFood. Each market in Southeast Asia has actually different needs and preferences because they are different. There's a very rich market like Singapore and a developing market like Indonesia, or slightly poorer market like Vietnam. And companies actually do need to customize a product a lot earlier in the game than you would do in another bigger market like China or North America or India. Selection is very important, much above delivery experience and even product quality. And pushing an app that's just built for Western markets may not work. So I want to now spend the rest of the time answering questions, and we can make this a bit more interactive. So Carol, if as I'm reading questions, like just open people's mics, and once we are done with these questions, if anyone has any other question, just raise your hand. Carol will open your mic and please speak.
Yep, guys, please ask questions.
Okay, I'm going to go to the question on the Q&A. If there's something from chat, I'll look at it a bit later. Okay, let's. I'm sorry, I'm not able to share my screen while doing this. Okay.
think we can start with
Oh,
Monica's question.
yeah. Sorry. Where's Monica's? I'll come to GrabFood first. I'll finish that, then we'll again go back to others. But Monica, that's a good question. I'll come back to your question. Okay, so we have a question from Anirudh. Based on as I see this Gojek with, no, we'll come to that a bit later. Okay, it's from an anonymous attendee. Okay, let's answer from anonymous. When you were just starting developing GrabFood, how did you figure out which feature is the most important, user surveys or tests on the app? Okay, so anonymous, it would be great if you can enter your name also on the chat. So hey, folks, so for this question, I would say the answer is actually similar to how you would do it in any other market. We had a starting point and we had certain objectives. Normally, when you are talking about features which are just customer oriented, we have a user research team that we work with. We have a design team. Before we launch, we do some dipstick tests. After we launch, we launch with A/B experiments. But I think there might be a hidden question there of how do you prioritize between needs of different markets? And for that, this is nothing to do with Grab. This is something I would say in general. I think you need to first prioritize on the goals and the targets that you have with respect to each market. So if for Grab, Philippines was the most important market, you would have to give a slightly more weight to that. But then there are if there are requests that are very unique to that market. But as a product manager, what I like to do personally is find things that are common. So sometimes when your business stakeholders ask for things, they might assume it's their exclusive problem, but actually all of them have asked you for something similar in many ways. So try to find what is common and build solutions that cater to all of them. I'll give you an example. I'll go back a few slides and give you an example. This one. You see this page on the app. This is actually the home page feed, as you browse. We used to get a lot of requests from markets. They said, hey, I want to show people, trending food. I want to show people the exclusive selection of restaurants that I have. I want to show people, more customized selection. So we took, and everybody from each market came up with something different. And what we ended up building was, and a colleague of mine who helped me build that is on this call, is we said, we will create a solution that helps any business person in any market put restaurants of type X in front of their users at a scheduled date and time on a particular day, so that they can run campaigns, they can experiment with different content, their marketing teams have full freedom. And we built it in such a way that everybody could do it. So we didn't have to prioritize between their needs. We found the commonality in their need. Question. Can you share why Grab decided to build a common app across SEA countries rather than custom app interfaces per country? So this is from Timothy. So Timothy, this is, so the way we build features, I think there are a lot of aspects that go into your app development, and one of them is the branding of your app. When you go the direction of building different apps for different countries, you can probably customize it a bit more, but then you will have to redo a lot of things. With a company like Grab, I think what we did very good early on was that all systems were designed to be configurable. So even though the interfaces might look similar, they can be different. And we have the ability to turn off or on certain features based on country, and we do that. So it's not exactly the same experience everywhere. There's another question. What's the story behind allowing island-wide delivery in Singapore versus localized delivery? Hey, folks, so I would not be able to answer this uh, on the island-wide delivery. It's because when the decision was taken, I was not part of the team at that time. It's a very recent thing. But Timothy, I mean, unless it's something confidential, I can get back to you after this. A question. Okay, there are a lot of questions. Let me go from the bottom. You should if you don't have resources to compete on. Okay. How is the search and discovery team able to design for each market in SEA? I think that's been answered, right? There are questions. Are there nationalities in your team that are different? Okay, that's a good question. How is your team deciding? How is your team being able to understand the customers? How does it have a diversity and so on? Actually, yes. We do have diversity in the overall working team. So we work very closely. So I'll give you an example. When I joined Grab in 2000, I joined Grab in late 2016. In 2017, as the product manager for new verticals like GrabNow, I made 30 visits to Indonesia, 30 plus visits to Indonesia in 1 year. And to the extent that a lot of people thought I was a local. And one of the things that I did at least was to get to know the local teams very well at a personal level, which sort of gave me an understanding of, uh, you know, their culture as well. And I think if you work for a market which is not different from yours, I would give this tip: spend time with the regional manager and spend time with their bosses, but also spend time with customer support and also spend time with people who work on the ground, people who make lower salaries. Because if you're working in mass market, their opinions are more representative of the mass market. Sometimes a managing director may not really understand the pain points of somebody who earns very little. So it's good to be in that, but this is more of an informal activity that you can do. But in a structured way, we do have very close collaboration with country teams. We have we call them country teams. Teams in different countries who continuously help us with getting insights. The marketing teams in each country, and there before COVID-19 had been a very good culture of visiting the markets because we can afford to. It's in Southeast Asia. That sort of helps you understand more. And in the team, we definitely have uh, people from a lot of nationalities in the team. Okay. Can you touch upon why the markets are selection heavy? This from Maria. Okay, Maria, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. This is not an expert final opinion on this. I'm giving you my opinion. I think the markets, for a lot of markets and a lot of times, it's normally the first mover who sets a precedent if they end up doing well. What happened in markets like Indonesia was that the incumbent, someone like a Gojek, had already followed that policy of focusing a lot more on selection. And so the expectations from the second player turns out to be similar, that, hey, you got to give me that as well. And second, I think, honestly, second, some of these things are just cultural. Like, it is very difficult for me to tell you I can tell you that we have found them to be selection heavy, but it's like, it's very difficult for me to tell you why is a particular market fond of vegetarianism, for example, or why is a particular market health conscious. Like Vietnam market is very health conscious in terms of quality of food. So it's just some cultural things. Like, I mean, that is the answer. It's just an observation. Hey, this is from Francis, product designer from First Circle. How do you validate whether certain factors such as selection, distance, delivery time will work for certain markets? What's your process for validating this? Hey, Francis, so that's a good question related to previous one. Hey, look, it's not just subjective, okay? You can't just go and ask a customer, oh, are you selection heavy? Are you price heavy? No, you have data. Yeah, so when you're typically doing that for a consumer app, you look at the data of what did people see, what did they buy? And data can tell you the elasticity of demand based on price, elasticity of demand based on delivery time, elasticity of demand based on selection. Although I've given you more subjective answers, the right way to do that, if you have no knowledge of the people, is just through data. Because see, somebody like Facebook, I don't think the product manager at Facebook knows how people in 200 countries behave. But they feed in the right data to the right machine learning models, which then produce the right answers. So that's what I would say. Go more based on data. Someone has a question about a concierge merchant. How much time do we have? We have 10 minutes, Carol. Okay. So when you onboard a concierge merchant, do you take their menu plus photos or commercials, or even that has some clever technique? Okay. By the way, I'm not I'm not very, I was not very involved in onboarding of merchants, but typically in these markets, there's, and this is nothing to do with Grab or food delivery. A lot of times you actually go to the restaurants and just take a snapshot of their menu. And you take a snapshot of their food photos sometimes, and you just upload it. That's a faster way to onboard them, which means that there can be a problem that the price is inaccurate because there's no merchant with an app or website that's changing it. But that's then dealt with as part of the game, as an trade-off. If any of you, have follow-up questions, please raise your hand and Carol will unmute your mic. Yeah. I remember seeing Slack community for undistancing project. Hey, I think this is regarding undistancing project. I think the team can send you a link at the end of this. Any plans for Grab to expand beyond SEA? Sorry, not the right person for this. That's a question for Grab's leadership. Is there a tip? Wait, is there a launch? If you had to launch a feature for Grab, would you prefer to launch in the biggest market or a smaller market, and why? So here's a question, like which market you decide to launch a particular feature in. So Anirudh, that depends, again, as I mentioned earlier, it depends on what the objective is. You typically, I mean, different companies have different ways of doing this, and different teams and product managers have different ways of doing this. Some product managers would launch it, in form of an experiment in a safer market, not really a bigger market or a smaller market, but in a safer market where that particular feature does not lead to too much change, but still like too much drastic change, but leads to an observable effect. Some, for sake of an immediate answer, would want to do it in the market where this feature is supposed to bring the maximum impact. For example, when we spoke about the halal filter, there is no way there's no biggest market and smallest market there. It's a relevant market. And if the relevant market is Singapore, you launch it there. You mentioned that in Indonesia, there are some questions I know I have not been able to answer, but you will get an answer to all of them as a follow-up to this chat. In the discussion, you mentioned in Indonesia, there is high supply driver. Why do riders still need to wait? Is it because drivers are located at different location? Wouldn't getting driver, okay, so this is related to GrabNow. The question is, you said people are waiting for drivers are waiting for people. Why, when there are so many drivers? Some of you who have probably worked in a transportation company will understand this. It seems intuitive that you should just allocate somebody a driver who's closest to them, but that doesn't work. The reason is fraud. There are a lot of, if that worked, there would be a lot of these drivers from Uber and Ola and Grab who would just sit next to each other and keep booking with their friend and keep taking on incentives. So typically, when you do allocation or in transport, you optimize for the system that everybody on average gets a driver in time, not just you get a driver who's 5 feet away from you. So that is why it's not always possible for you to get a driver who's closest to you. I think, so if some of you had that question in life, why didn't I get the closest driver? That's the answer. Don't blame the company. They're trying to average it out for everybody. What is the, so if you do, okay, maybe there we can take 2 more questions here. Just maybe 1 more question. Yeah. As a product manager, how much of the problem identification and solving process were you involved in? Will you be more involved in execution? So I think there's a question specifically. I would answer this question specifically from my end because completely involved. Normally, there are 2 types of problems that you solve. Problems that you identify from customer data, from business metrics, performance metrics, and problems that you are given. An example of problem that you're given is, why don't you launch a grocery store within the Grab app? That's a problem you're given, maybe by someone in higher management. A problem you identify is that, you know what, people are dropping off when they search. So in any case, I think the product team was involved in completely evaluating the business case and the customer context before prioritizing anything. Okay, I'll maybe answer this last question. How would you, sorry, there's a new question that came in. What is your most favorite practice to get insights about customers in different markets? I think that's an important question to answer. So to anyone who wants to do that, like, so some of you I know would already be very good at this, but for sake of those who would want to know, you know, I found, you know, so I'm not from Southeast Asia. I moved here from Bangalore 3.5 years ago. What I've found is, in general, if to understand a market or to understand metrics, you need to first understand the people who are using this. I'll give you an example. Like, you might see that in certain markets, some people use a particular app feature the most. Maybe in Facebook, some markets people use stories more, some markets people post more. You cannot understand that unless you understand the people contextually. So what I did when I came to this market was I actually went to this particular book. There's a very nice book. I would recommend this to anybody who wants to learn about this market. It's a short history of Southeast Asia. If you're new to any market, I would like you to maybe understand the cultural context of this. And, you know, after I read this, when I was looking at problems, it really helped me understand, like, what is this person talking about? When I heard a customer speak, this is what I want. I, I realized this person does not think like me, but I can understand why. Second, as I said, have good relations with your local partners, country BOs, etc. If it's possible, if your company allows it, and if COVID-19 ever goes away, travel to that market. So I know a lot of you travel to Indonesia and you say you travel to Bali. No, that's a different market. Travel to a place like Jakarta. Travel to a place like Bandung, which is another big city in Indonesia, and just stay there for 3 days. Uh, Go out, eat local food, and you'll realize you put yourself in context where you start to get it. Okay, this is why this is happening. I face this problem. My internet's not working. If you live in Singapore, most people cannot imagine what life without bad internet is. We just cannot. We get we get 1 Gbps, and like we take it for granted. So do that. I think that would help. And read read up and believe in metrics. Don't assume the metrics are wrong just because your understanding of the market is not accurate. Okay. Hey, let me just see if there are any more questions. Otherwise, there's one question. Did GrabNow increase cancellations for other Grab bookings? Harshita, I cannot comment on the metrics there. Okay, I think we've answered most of this. I had a, okay, this was a slide. Sorry, this was a question slide. So I had a great time chatting with all of you. If there are questions that have not been answered, there is, all of them have been noted down. They're all recorded, and we will be sending those out. We will be sending answers to those out. There is a last slide here, I think, which is, it's thanking our donors. So, just wanted to thank you all for attending this. Think overall in the Undistancing project, a lot of us speakers who have come in, and there are people from everywhere. There are people from every continent now. I mean, except, actually people from 4 continents now. And all of them have just come together because, we just want to give back to community. And we're also hoping that this can, help a cause. So to all of you who donated, thank you so much. There has been an invite that has been sent across for a more casual chat to all of you after this. Look forward to getting to know all of you. And for if any of you want to reach out to me after this again, you can reach out to me on my LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn. So, just come here, connect, say hi, and I'll respond to you. This is the link on the top. And you can always respond to the Undistancing project mail, and you'll be able to find a speaker. Yep, so that's it. It was great to see. I think we have a lot of people who are still here. So it's great to see this participation in the first ever webinar that we did. It's quite encouraging, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone who joined us for today's webinars. Thank you, Mr. Vaibhav, for sharing your insights. This is so helpful. And just everyone, thank you for your time and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Advait. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Bonnie. Kishore. Please do give feedback, people. We'll send across something of feedback.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.